go ahead with your 16.
And 54 seconds.
And 50.
Yes, thank you. Okay, everybody. I'm Mark Albus, and I'm going to talk about Interphylum loanwords in Shorto's Mon-Khmer Comparative Dictionary. Let me start by pointing out that in the Old Khmer Digital Dictionary, there are over 3,000 Sanskrit words. In early Vietnamese texts, there are thousands of Chinese words, but many of these words are not in the modern, not in usage in the modern languages, the corresponding languages, and many of them have not spread to other Austroasiatic languages. So these are not the kinds of words that I'm going to be talking about. Instead, that focuses on widespread loanwords in Austroasiatic, words from other language families other than Austroasiatic, specifically those found in Shorto's 2006 reconstructions in his Mon-Khmer Comparative Dictionary. So this study adds to Southeast Asian etymological research broadly, but also understanding of historical language contact. There are many, many other mainland Southeast Asian regional loanwords that I do not address in this talk, but this is, I think, a useful case study of mainland Southeast Asian loanwords. Using large amounts of digital, searchable lexical evidence combined with some supporting ethnohistorical information as well. I think it is fairly representative of these kind of interphylum loanwords in the region. And finally, I hope that what I do provides some context, data, and methods for anyone to further assess etymological origins in the in mainland Southeast Asia, a very messy, complex area to deal with. Since the 1990s, I've been working on Vietnamese etymology, and of course that requires exploring comparative data from other, from neighboring languages. And I've looked at comparative Austroasiatic data, of course, during that time, including what I now consider the defunct Vieto-Katuic hypothesis. But for the last several years, I've expanded deeper into Austroasiatic etymological research and focusing on the mainland Southeast Asian region. And I've published and presented on several semantic/cultural domains like these here on the slide, with specific attention to Austroasiatic. Blench and Sidwell have provided various other studies, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list. Okay. And oops, sorry, I lost my note there. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but some of the words in the previous studies are also included in Shorto's MKCD, but in fact, many more are not. So again, more sifting needs to be done. But this study for now is focused on what's in Shorto's work. Okay, and the reason that it is focused on this is because in the last year, Paul Sidwell and I have been reviewing Shorto's approximately 2,100 Austroasiatic reconstructions, and we gave a presentation about our project at last year's ICAL. We've checked a fairly full extent of modern available digital lexical data, and we've applied a variety of criteria for making our assessments. And as on the slide here, currently, maybe about 750 Proto-Austroasiatic items out of those 2,100. Several hundred are Austroasiatic innovations, basically interbranch loanwords, commonly from Khmer or Mon into other Austroasiatic languages. We rejected several hundred items that were problematic. And then we have this loanwords from other language families, about 100 items. I think, approximately 80 something of these are of high certainty of the origin, which means, again, some of it's still a little uncertain. And these can be changed subject to new data, but for now, this is the status of the ongoing project. It's in a worksheet we hope to share next year. Many of the several hundred Austroasiatic innovations, the interbranch loanwords, they've also spread into neighboring language families, Dai, Malayo-Chamic, Tibeto-Burman. We've identified some of those in our working spreadsheet, but that's for another study. That's not for today's talk. So here are the preliminary numbers of etymological sources, and you'll notice how the first four categories, the top four language groups, range from about 15 to 20 items each, so relatively comparable. But as I'll show, Indic and Semitic words are particularly widespread geographically. And this is partly due, of course, to traded cultural items of importance, because both of those societies did that. But it's also because of multiple linguistic conduits of borrowing, of the lexical transmission. For example, you go from Sanskrit to Khmer, and then Khmer to other Austroasiatic languages, or Sanskrit to Mon or Dai or Malayic, and then into various Austroasiatic languages. Or if it's Chinese, it may have gone into Dai, like the instance of chest, and then into Austroasiatic languages, things like that. And they spread as well, of course, among the Austroasiatic branches. Now, another way to explore the frequency of interphylum loanwords is by getting the average number of branches, Austroasiatic branches, with the lexical attestations of these loanwords. That's what I have here in this list. So it means, on average, the Sinitics, the highest, with 5.4 branches with attestations from all of the from what's in the study. Okay, just another way of looking at it. Not serious numbers, but I think it gives perspective. Dai, though, is only 4.2, but Dai is an important conduit for Sinitic loanwords, spreading loanwords. I'll mention that again. So Dai in particular plays a significant role in the spread of loanwords in mainland Southeast Asia. So besides etymological origin, I do try to provide some approximate chronology. We need that for the framework, right? There are some BCE era loanwords, but the evidence is not decisive. I consider them possible, but in the Common Era, though, there's solid evidence of first millennium CE loans. We can find instances support for that in Old Khmer texts. We look at Vietnamese tones and other phonological features. Ethnohistorical data can help as well. In the second millennium, we need to add the category of Southwest Tai loans, coming with the Southwest Tai expansion. This also means, though, that Sinitic loanwords were borrowed indirectly via Dai. But in many cases, there's uncertainty of chronology, many cases, especially among the minority languages. And of course, words may have been borrowed at different times in different languages. We really need careful historical phonological study in individual languages, especially in the minority languages. There are some studies, but more would be helpful to get more chronological points of reference. The more we have, the more we can, get a little bit more information. But for now, these are the general periods to provide chronological framework to make hypotheses. As for the types here, the categories of words, classes of words, we expect trade items, clothing, domesticated animals, but some of these words, some of the nouns do affect daily activities in a more general way, not just trade. And there's a notable number of verbs, with some with a cognitive nature. There are various adjectives, some describing a human physique. So the range of types of nouns that goes beyond trade items, and the loanwords really begin to enter the realm of daily life. So this is what we expect from long-term multilingual situations, right? That's what we would expect. Next, I'll show samples of words, word origins by language group. And let's start with Chinese. So the Sinitic loans, as I mentioned, were often spread through other languages, typically Dai or Vietnamese. Sometimes it's impossible to know which, right? In this table, noticing that word for upper body garment, I think the most likely scenario is borrowing, of course, into Vietnamese from Chinese in the first millennium, considering the tone category. I don't have time to explain the historical phonology of it. The earliest attestation in Khmer texts, and it has the same vowels, so it only dates back a few hundred years. So I think this supports it as being, from Vietnamese into them, and not Chinese, which Southern Chinese may have had other vowels. So it seems probable. As for the Chinese word for hat, you see that kind of muk there. It likely spread from Old Chinese, so that's a considerable time depth, into Dayak when it still had a final K. But in Vietnamese, there is also a form without the K, but still the expected tone category for very late stage Old Chinese. But of course, the Diac form didn't spread into Austroasiatic languages until the second millennium. So that, messy chronology, but that's some of the chronological information we can get. The Chinese word for to dye, as of cloth, is in Austroasiatic Tai, some Tibeto-Burman languages. It's a kind of complicated history to figure out this sort of thing. But and you can see these words for look forward to and to add to, which are in both Diac and Vietnamese. So it would have spread variously. It's not always possible to identify which is the source, but okay. The Chinese word for cage appears in 3 entries in the MKCD. And I think the likely scenario is borrowing from different stages with different phonological shapes, but also potentially from Tibeto-Burman and or Diac. And really, there needs to be an ethnohistorical study of these kinds of containers in the region, and I just haven't found any. In my 2015 study on domesticated birds, words for domesticated birds in mainland Southeast Asia, I note both the spread of Sinitic words for domesticated birds and the term, this one here, for cages, precisely to hold birds. It was just another kind of Chinese trade practice spread along with the words into mainland Southeast Asia, but with multiple roots. There is likely some debate about the histories of some of these words, such as elephant and crossbow. I know that that's debatable to some, but as far as I can tell, there is early textual evidence in Chinese that puts these words back to the first and even second millennium BC, and they're supporting archaeohistorical evidence. So I don't see strong support for other possibilities, such as Austroasiatic and Sinitic. I don't think so. And if any of these turn out to be Proto-Trans-Himalayan, Proto-Sino-Tibetan, if that exists, we can still consider Sinitic to be the donor language, especially when the tone categories match. But as noted, Dai is a likely conduit of some or perhaps many of these, such as goose there, which has the H onset versus the angma, which happens in other words, loanwords as well. By the way, this means that Shorto reconstructed Austroasiatic words that are from Chinese. So did Li Fangui for Proto-Dai, and Fairlose did as well for some Vedic words. So these Chinese words are rather pervasive. Next, Pali, Sanskrit are very well known for being borrowed into Khmer and Mon, and later Tai and Lao, and of course throughout the Malayic world. Hugervorst's work on the spread of Indic words among the literate national languages quite insightful. In his description, there's a situation in which local religious elites helped spread these words, but I think the amount of Indic presence, Indic speakers is murky. But regardless, what appears to have happened is that after they were borrowed into the major languages, the word spread among various branches of Austroasiatic, presumably from Khmer and Mon, but perhaps Tai and Lao, or Malayic and Chamic. It's always messy. Many of these words represent significant sociocultural introductions into the region, such as cotton, sugar, plowshare. Old Khmer texts contain many of these words from the mid-first millennium CE to the turn of the millennium there, sort of the Chunla and Angkor period. So these mostly predate the Southwest Tai expansion. How many of these spread into other Austroasiatic branches before the Southwest Tai expansion? That could only be answered through careful historical phonological study in those languages, and I don't know the answer to that. As for Malayic and Chamic loans, in some cases here, the words are only borrowed from Malayic, such as this hangover shoulder. It's only from Malay, not Chamic. But in fact, in most cases, both language groups, both Chamic and Malayic, are donors. Now, is this coincidence, or was there some kind of, they're in different areas, but was there some kind of a common cultural predisposition for these words to be shared, or is it just coincidence? I don't know the answer. The best supported words in here are those that have been reconstructed in Proto-Austronesian, the PAN you can see in there, or at least Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, PMP. This includes words such as guest, crocodile, varan, kind of varan, and sugarcane. They are unlikely to be loans from Austroasiatic into these languages with these kinds of deep history reconstructions. I'm not totally confident of sesamum and on the next page, buffalo, but for now, these are the assumed origins, unless evidence shows otherwise. In this table, this one here of Chamic Malayic, I've not found any Proto-Austronesian items, but several have Proto-Chamic reconstructions from Thurgood, 1999, and most have both Malay and Chamic attestations. So being being loanwords from both groups does make it a stronger case that these are not from AA, but were borrowed into AA, but it doesn't mean for certain that they were. So less solid than those with the Proto-Austronesian reconstructions, but still feasible, I think, feasible. Regarding Daic loanwords, again, the assumption is that these are words that spread mostly with the Southwest Tai expansion, so really, second millennium. Although I believe I've written that some early loans from Dai entered Vietic, that would have been before the Daic expansion, because Vietic was far to the north, but into deep into mainland Southeast Asia, that would be in the second millennium. At what period in the second millennium were some of these words borrowed? It's difficult to determine a precise timing. Early second millennium, mid second millennium, late second millennium. Many of these are not found in the early Khmer texts. The two that I have here are only from around the year 1700, so they're not very old in Khmer, or at least there is no support for truly ancient borrowings. And so I think that supports their borrowing into Austroasiatic. The kinds of Daic loanwords include a pretty wide range, and all in all, there's a sense of historical community bilingualism. And once more, these are only the Daic loanwords, and Daic also spread many of the Chinese loanwords. So it really highlights the Daic impact on the lexical landscape in mainland Southeast Asia from the second millennium. So some final thoughts here. There were obviously widespread loans from Sinitic and Indic, often via secondary language groups, with Dai notably influential in the second millennium. More checking and adding of data will, undoubtedly shift some details, but I think the overall characterizations here will probably remain. The loanwords that loanwords were reconstructed in the Mon-Khmer Comparative Dictionary. It shows the complexity of mainland Southeast Asian etymological research, but still, it's not an outstanding number in Shorto's work. Pretty much about 4% of the items. And this framework for assessing lexical origins and chronology, I believe, could be used for future historical linguistic exploration of mainland Southeast Asian etymological research and language contact. And additional informative new data and ideas are welcome. Anything that you can find that is beyond what we can get out of these databases or other things. But basically everything that's been published, certainly in the 20th century, it all has to be rechecked. We can't say, oh, this smart person published this in 1960. We have to check it. It all has to be rechecked, and that's what we do with these databases, and it's quite productive. But it helps to have some structure and methodology in it. So that's what I'd like to say. And looks like I'm at 19 minutes, I guess, so I'm pretty good.
You're at